Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here with Ebonie Michelle. Ebonie, welcome to the podcast. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Teplinsky, or as we call you now, Dr. T. I've been looking forward to this. I really have.
Same. So much to talk about, but I think let's start with tell us a little bit about who you are and the amazing,
Hmm.
amazing work that you're doing.
Well, who I am a small town girl. No, I am a mom. I am a wife. I am a daughter, a sister. And I think for the work that I do now, I am also a breast cancer survivor. I have been going through a very interesting 6 years. I am a bilateral breast cancer survivor. So I actually had stage 1A on one side and I had HER2 positive on the other side. Luckily, I was able to catch both of them early. So my treatment plan didn't include like traditional chemotherapy and radiation. But I did do endocrine therapy. And because I have lupus and a couple of other autoimmune conditions, how I was able to navigate the treatment stage of my cancer was very interesting. So, but besides a breast cancer survivor, I also have a master's in public health, specifically in behavioral health and education. And especially with the work that I do now, I lean really heavily on that. I'm a graduate of the Florida A&M or FAMU Institute of Public Health. I'm really proud of that because the education that I gained there actually set me up for what I do now. When I told my professor that I specifically work in sexual health and wellness, I don't think that she laughed quick enough because she's like, I don't think you realize this has always been where you've been headed. I've always, in some way or some form, had my finger in the pie, if you will, of women's health.
And so, how did, although I maybe it seems natural now, I'm just gonna mute my, hold on a second, let me mute my other computer here. Al Although it seems natural now, how did you transition or move into that sexual health and wellness space? I mean, these are conversations that are so needed, not happening enough, but it's not an easy field to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
It is not. And to be quite honest with you, anger is what got me there. When I was diagnosed, because I didn't have to do what is considered traditional chemotherapy and radiation, I was just under the impression that I would not have such a challenging journey when it came to sexual health and wellness. And I noticed that it wasn't just the biological changes, it's the physical, the emotional, the mental, all of these things that are wrapped up together. And excuse me, at the time I was even seeing a therapist, but I was like, there's something more that's going on here. And I noticed that it began to really impact the relationship that I had with my husband. And when I went to my oncologist, she sent me to a department that specifically within that hospital system worked with sexual health and wellness. And I was turned away. They were like, you have the wrong type of cancer. We're not going to help you. I asked if they could refer me to someone else, and they were just like, no. And the dehumanization in that moment that I felt, I still feel it to some degree. And I promised myself after sitting in that for a minute that I would not allow another woman to go through this if there is something that I could do to change that narrative. And so I really started just doing a lot of research on sexual health and wellness and not just the challenges that I was having, not just the challenges that women were having, but the challenges that men were having. And therefore, not just, heterosexual couples, but same sex couples, relationships, situationships, whatever you want to call them. When you are diagnosed with a chronic condition in many cases, like cancer, it takes so much from you and it takes and takes. And so I just really started reaching out to not just subject matter experts, but I also wanted to reach out to women who were actually in the fight, so to speak, those who had just been recently diagnosed, those who've been diagnosed 10, 20. One woman I spoke to, she'd been diagnosed 30 years ago, to see how all of this impacted their bodies, their minds, their relationship. And when I saw the damage that the absence of these conversations was having, as big as my mouth is, it's like, if I'm going to be, shouting from the rooftops, something, it has to be something of value. And, like I've said, I've always been headed here. Always. I've had endometriosis, I've had adenomyosis, ovarian cysts. My evolution of my sexuality as a woman, especially my relationship to my reproductive system, has never been normal. So I know what it's like to be on the outside looking in and just, screaming into the void and no one hears you, but when it's cancer or lupus or MS or something that you have no control over, you didn't ask for this. You chose life. And in choosing life, that comes with this mixed bag of nuts, as they say. And it's like, okay, now we have to work all of this out. And doctors, unfortunately, many physicians, they're just not equipped. They're not equipped. They're not given the guidance. They're not given the education. And I think in some cases they aren't really given the support.
I agree. I think there is no education. There's very limited education, and there are a lot of biases. There's a lot of discomfort with the subject, and there's been research on this in terms of why providers don't bring up the topic, in terms of why patients don't bring up the topic, and there are barriers at every single step of the way, to the point where it just leads to this situation where it's not being addressed, and patients are feeling isolated. They're feeling alone. They're feeling like they're the only ones going through it. And because it's not being discussed, then it leads to the situation where providers are maybe not even aware of the impact
Yeah.
that these medications and treatments can cause in sexual health. And not even just medications and treatment, but the mere fact of a cancer diagnosis and the impact on body image, and for women, femininity, and the mind body connection, and this really biopsychosocial model of sexual
Mhm.
health. So,
It,
what does your work look
oh.
like?
It looks
How much
very,
time do we have?
very different, right? Depending upon the day. But what my work looks like, a couple of different things. So even though sexual health and wellness is really where our foundation is, I also do speak about the importance of more Black and Brown women in clinical trials, and not just Black and Brown women, but people of, across the spectrum of ethnicity. We definitely need more data, more information about what is going on with our bodies and how cancer impacts all of these things, because the more information we have on us all, the better situation that we are in to really target something that is decimating our families right now. So I always make sure that I say that. But so there are a couple of different things. One of the things that I love to do is actually speak to physicians. And in my advocacy role, when I speak with physicians, whether it's a webinar, whether it's one on one, whether I'm going into doctors' offices and having these conversations, my main goal is to, number one, come to an agreement that sexual health and wellness is important in cancer care. Number two, what has prevented that oncologist, that practitioner from having these conversations with their patients? That's number two. And number three, are you ready now to support your patients in the best way possible? And if that means that you are not necessarily able to provide that support, then what we will do is we will take over that support for your client base. And what that looks like, it can be one-on-one consultations with what are some of the challenges that you're having right now. And I always work, when I work with a woman, it's always, please make sure that you let your physician know that we're having these discussions, a checklist of these are the things that you need to ask your physician, especially for women that are newly diagnosed. What I try to make sure that clinicians understand is that the sooner you broach these issues with your patients, the more likely they will have a reduced burden of sexual dysfunction throughout their journey. So that's in a nutshell kind of how I work with physicians, but I also work with our community in, as a whole. And again, those are one-on-one conversations. They are webinars. We have a series that we just started this year, which are our Thirsty Thursday series. And every first Thursday of the month, we choose a different topic to help to support the individuals, the women, and the partners in our community. We added men this year, but truth be told, I'm still really expanding my knowledge about some of the challenges that they have and how to meet those challenges with evidence based information while also taking into account the some of the challenges of their significant others, so to speak. So we're still catching up on that game. But for example, one was a spoken word session. And it was where we had survivors, where we had partners come and perform their spoken word poetry as a way to really purge some of the emotional trauma that exists when you are diagnosed with cancer. We just had a our special session, which was a session for the LGBTQIA plus community, and we had Dr. Monique Gary, who everybody knows as affectionately as Dr. Mo, to talk about how to advocate for yourself as a member of the LGBTQIA community, especially in a healthcare system that many times does not see you, does not respect you, and does not regard you the way that you should. And so July is Independence Day, so it's going to be about dating and how to trust yourself and how to get back out there after a diagnosis of cancer, because again, it reverberates through every part of your life. So we have our Thirsty Thursday sessions. We do have our podcast, our Prowl The LAB podcast, where we speak to subject matter experts, where we talk to women with different experiences, where we talk to clinicians with different experiences. So we try to be a clearinghouse, to be really honest with you, of information and support. And we just started our sexual health and wellness collection, which are a series of about 11 guides that we have created, not just with survivors and not just with thrivers, but with clinicians as well, to make sure that we're able to give them guidance for how to navigate sexual health and wellness after a cancer diagnosis or a diagnosis of another type of chronic illness that can impact you just as severely as cancer can.
I really love that. I mean, it's so multifaceted, and it's this focus on wellness and
Mm-hmm.
going up, yes, with sexual health, but also wellness in so many different capacities because it's also interconnected.
It is.
In in speaking with the community, you have spoken with so many different members of the community. What would you say are people's really top concerns?
Body image is the number one concern that I hear from women. And I must, you speaking from my own experience, I was like, if there's something that's not working, below the belt, so to speak, I can work that out. But how am I supposed to work this out? You just, your first budding, experience with womanhood is the budding of your breast. We can't wait to wear our first training bra and show it off to our friends in the bathroom when we get to school. We can't wait for all of these things. And so when you feel like that is taken from you, not you didn't give it away. They are taken from you. And it is a literal amputation of not just the body, but the soul. And in many cases, the spirit and the essence of what many of us consider to be our womanhood, that it reverberates. There's no part of your life that it does not touch. The way that you parent your children, the way that you communicate with your significant other, whether or not you choose to share with your family what is going on with you. Healthy sexuality, of which sexual wellness is a huge component of it, literally touches every facet of your life. So when I speak to women about their challenges, it's how can I be intimate without wearing a shirt all the time? How do I get comfortable turning the lights on? How do I get used to these 10 scars where once upon a time I didn't have any? There are young women that I speak to, and I think it's so, when I talk to them, it's the most heartbreaking because it's like, well, who's going to want me now? I might not be able to give someone children. I wear a bikini and I have scars that crisscross my body because, yes, there are some women who, this, who are diagnosed with breast cancer, but that's not the only part of our body that we end up having to have surgery on. And so it changes, but the body image is probably the first. But a close second, truthfully, is self-love and self-care because they recognize that they are no longer the woman that they used to be and the woman that they thought that they would be. But one of the things that I try to remind them is that, yes, things are different, but different does not always mean bad. Different does not always mean diminished. Different can also mean replenished. It does not have to be the absence of, it can be embracing what I did not even know was there. So I try to really reframe it, and it's difficult. Hell, I know when I was going through it, I couldn't reframe it for myself. It took a lot. And I think by the nature of what I do, I think some people think that my husband and I have sex all the time. I'm never, ashamed of my body. I never have days where I'm like, oh, the hell with this. Like what is going on today? I feel all of those things.
Mhm.
I feel all of those things, and I recognize that that is going to be a part of my journey for a very long time. Now, I don't know, very long is relative, to be quite honest with you, but I'll never have my breast back. Never. And no matter how great how great a job my plastic surgeon did, I still look in that mirror and realize these are not my breasts. And I even had to reconcile the fact that, honestly, Dr. Teplinsky, when I got my implants, I did that more for the comfort of others than I did for myself. So. Mhm.
Huh? I mean, I hear that a
Mhm.
lot.
Yeah.
And I think it is so tied to the concept of self-love and self-care. And one of the things that I hear often is, a lot of these topics, the body image, the sexual health, self-love, it almost gets addressed later. You're newly diagnosed, you're going through all the chemo and this and that, surgery, recovery, and so it's survival mode. And then as you shift into this really healing, regrowth, rebuilding period, what I hear for so often from women is I feel guilty focusing on this. I feel guilty taking the time to address this. So many people help me in so many ways, and I feel guilty saying I'm still suffering or going through that. And, I always really try to say that this is so important and you should take the time and you shouldn't feel guilty, but easier said than done. How do you address some of those, as I'm sure you get them as well, in terms of some of these feelings that women experience?
I think the first thing that all of us have to understand and accept is that these feelings are valid. There's nothing wrong with how you feel. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with you waking up one day and saying, the hell with this. I don't want to deal with this today. I just want to get back in my bed, put these covers over my head, and, just take a minute for me. There's nothing wrong with that. But we have been conditioned to believe that we're not allowed to grieve, but for so long. We're not allowed to stay stuck, but for so long. And I think that in the cancer community, so many women have told me that their physicians treat them like, oh, well, you should just be happy to be alive. You shouldn't want to thrive. You shouldn't want to, go out in the pouring rain and scream to the top of your lungs if that's what, you should decide. It's, you made it this far. A lot of people don't make this far, so just be grateful. And I think that that is a very damaging thing because a lot of women take that with them. And so one of the things that I do tell women is that you're going to grieve. That was some of the best advice that a woman gave me when I was going through a really tough time when I was diagnosed. And I don't think that if she had given me it, I don't think that if she hadn't given me that advice, that I would have been as prepared for what she meant. And I thought she was saying, be prepared to grieve the people that you're going to lose in terms of like the loss of life and the people that you become comfortable with. But what she told me was you have to grieve the life that you knew before. You have to grieve friends. You have to grieve family members. You have to grieve loved ones because there are people who are in your life today who are living and breathing. And it will truly be a grieving process where you realize that those people are no longer in your life anymore. And so I tell women that when you're grieving yourself, the loss of yourself, when you're grieving the loss of those loved ones, when you're grieving the loss of everything that was before you heard those three words, you have cancer, you have to feel what is there in order to be able to transmute that into something to fuel your recovery and to fuel your healing. The only way that you can heal is to purge the pain, the anger, the sadness, and so many of the other negative feelings that we oftentimes experience. I always recommend that women journal. Everyone is not a journaler. I get that. It took me several years, before I started doing it, but it's a cathartic way sometimes and you of being able to look back and say, this is where I was that day, but this is where I am today, and this is where I might be tomorrow. So feeling what you need to feel, making sure that you're able to access those feelings at your pace. And again, I am a huge proponent of therapy because you have cancer, some of the most traumatic words you will ever hear in your life. And we can't just pick up and keep moving like nothing ever happened because from that moment on, your life will never be the same. So we have to do the work to make sure that it's the life that we want and it's the life that we deserve and that we know that we are worthy of that.
What a beautiful sentiment. And it takes time. This is not something that is done in a week, in a month, and like you mentioned, there are hurdles and there are setbacks, and especially with as we think about cancer treatment, there are always things. There's always another surgery, a reconstruction, a revision, a new medication, right? All of these things. And then I think the other part too to keep in mind is that bodies are then always changing as outside of cancer, right? So there's menopause and aging and other medical conditions and all of the things that happen in life. And not to mention that as we are seeing younger and younger breast cancer, this is affecting women as they are in this prime of their life with careers and parenting and relationships and children. And those are all the things that play into body image and sexuality and self-love on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that right now, in my opinion, I just believe that, especially when I think about young women, they are bombarded on so many different fronts about who they should be, what they should look like, what they should do. You hear all of these different terms for different types of women, and I just feel like there is so much dilution, if you will, of what it truly means to be safe and secure in your womanhood. And, when at one point in time, I met so many well, I was young at the time too. I was like, I don't want children, I used to, I could tell I was driving my parents nuts. But it's a very different conversation that you have with a young woman when she's like, I don't think I want to have children. Then unfortunately, due to your treatment, you won't be able to have children. Those are two very different conversations. You
Well, it's
know,
because your choice is taken away from you.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think that is probably the naive mindset of youth is that we feel like we're always going to have choice, like it'll always be there. And when
Yeah.
we're facing something like cancer, and so many of your choices have been snatched away from you, and in some cases, even the choice to save your life has been snatched away from you, it's so difficult to worry about sex when you're worried about survival. When I was looking for my oncologist, I wasn't looking for the oncologist that was going to make sure that I kept having regular sex with my husband. That's not what I was looking for. I was looking for an oncologist to save my life. I was looking for an oncologist to give me the information and the data and the support. But, and there's no but, because that means you negate everything you say before that. I will say, however, your oncologist can be both. They can be both, and they may not have sexual health and education information, but especially in some hospital systems that are large ecosystems, there are multidisciplinary areas within your ecosystem that you can refer your patients to so that they can prepare for what is going to take place before it occurs, so that you're giving them the respect, you're giving them the knowledge, and you're actually giving them some of that choice back. Because once it's gone, it's very difficult to rejuvenate low sex drive. Once you go so long without having an orgasm, the more difficult it's going to be for you to be able to produce an orgasm in your body afterwards. So I just really try to impress upon not just the clinicians, but upon the patients as well, is that we have to have preemptive conversations so that excuse me, no, no, we're not going to do that. I'm sorry, it's my puppy. Everything will come home. But, I try to tell them we have to take some ownership. We have to take some ownership. And yes, that's not going to be the first thing that's on your mind. But as these questions come to you in the coming weeks, in the coming months, write them down.
Yep.
Make sure
Hmm.
that you don't lose any of these questions. One of the things that we have in we have our Buoyancy and Bliss. It's a free sexual wellness toolkit, and we talk about the different ways to have conversations when you're first diagnosed, or when you're going through treatment, or after you started treatment, to kind of to make sure that there's clear language. I have been having pain in my vaginal area for 3 months. It's a sharp pain that I have every time I go to the bathroom, and it didn't start until after I started taking this medication. So we try to teach women how to track certain things. As you become more comfortable with understanding your diagnosis and you become more comfortable in your treatment plan, that's when many women start saying, feeling like, okay, I feel a little bit of comfort, I feel a little bit of safety. So now maybe I can start asking some of these questions. But even then, as you know, Dr. T, it's still hard to have those questions because we are somehow taught that sex is supposed to be easy. That, a woman or a man is supposed to walk into the room and then, everything just works like it does in the movies. And I tell women I work with all the time, there are women who have never had a cancer diagnosis, have never had a chronic illness diagnosis, who still experience some form of sexual dysfunction, who may experience low sex drive. So I really try to communicate to women that just as we don't want our physicians to, narrow their focus down to just a diagnosis, we also can't define ourselves solely by that diagnosis as well. And we have to speak up. Unfortunately, we have to speak up because one of the things you said before, clinicians are not comfortable having these conversations. In many cases, they're no more comfortable than the patients who are coming to them to seek that information.
And I do feel very strongly that if clinicians aren't comfortable, I do think it is the responsibility then to refer to somebody who
Yeah,
will be comfortable, right? I think that, I'm very comfortable. I talk a lot about sexual health, and
you
there are
do.
people that I work with that are not comfortable, but they will then say, I'm going to refer you to this person who can talk about it,
Absolutely.
right? I do think that is the responsibility of the oncology group, providers, physicians, nurse
Hmm.
practitioners, whoever, right, to recognize who are the other people that are going to be part of your care. And I want to talk a little bit about the pledges that you have on the Prowl website, right? You have a clinician pledge and a patient advocacy pledge, and
I do.
they're really important. But can you tell us a little bit about what they are and where people can find them and, take them?
Absolutely. So back up, we're going back just for a second. One of the things that I'll say is I agree with you. I do think that oncologists should know enough information to be able to refer their patients out. But one of the things that I also recommend to oncologists is to really lean on your senior nursing staff, because your nursing staff many times knows your patients and has more abundant conversations about family and life and things like that with your patients than you do. And so sometimes being able to lean into that senior staff, even if it's having one point person, to understand who are the sex therapists who are in our ecosystem right now, who are our pelvic floor therapists, if there are women who we know who could potentially be experiencing intimate partner or domestic violence, what are the protocols that we have set in place so that we're able to address those things? So I just want to say, really leaning into your nursing staff can be a huge source of not just support, but can be a huge source of fruitful information, not just for your patients, but also for you.
I agree.
And so, and the second part of the question, forgive me, brain fog. What was the second part?
The pledges on your
My
website.
pledges. I
Yes.
love my pledges. And the reason why we put the pledges on there, so we have a self advocacy pledge where we have patients and their partners, well, patients, survivors, previvors, and partners to take a pledge to say, I recognize that my sexual health and wellness is important. And I will no longer put that to the side because of discomfort, because it's not, it's something that's taboo. I recognize that this is a part of my wholeness. This is a part of who I am as a person. And so I am going to take the initiative to advocate for myself in this clinical space so that I can be the best version of myself when I am outside of that clinical space. And so the other part of that are the clinicians. These pledges are for clinicians to say, I understand that sexual health and wellness is important in cancer care. And even if I don't have all the answers, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to find these answers for my patients so that, again, I am not just treating the diagnosis, I'm also treating that person who is carrying this diagnosis. My company, even though it's called, Prowl the LAB, it actually started as the Lab by Reciprocity. And the reason that I called it that was because this is a reciprocal relationship between the clinician, the patients, the previvors, the survivors, and thrivers. This cannot be a one-way street because clinicians cannot read our minds. They don't know what we're going through. But by the same token, I do think that some clinicians, actually, most clinicians, should be aware of some of the potential issues that could arise so that you are preparing your patient, you are preparing someone who is going into, survivorship, who may think, once I'm out of this treatment phase, I'll never have to deal with these again. And it's like these issues again. It's like that's not always the case. There are some women that carry side effects from their treatment for many years that impact their level of sensation, that impact their desire, and honestly impact their joy with sexual health and wellness.
I think it's so important. And even just the act of having it on paper and signing it and
Mhm.
committing
Yes,
to this for yourself, for your patients, it really kind of, I think, puts it, you know, in the center, right? And makes you
yes,
realize, okay, wait, I have to think through this. And on the patient side, I deserve this.
yes,
I'm entitled to this,
yes.
right?
You're
And I
worthy of
think
this.
you're worthy of it. And
Absolutely.
when so many other voices sometimes make you feel like you're not, right? I think
Mhm.
having that is huge.
And I know I try not definitely won't cuss on your podcast, but there's something I tell women all the time. And I'm just like, at the end of the day, just who
Yeah.
cares what they are talking about? At the end of the
Mhm.
day, this is your life, and you have to do what is best for you. And we were talking at BaddyCon not too long ago with you. I was there with a group of women, and first of all, I noticed that the older the women are that I talk with, I am just like blown away. I'm just like, you all need to do my job. Like, what is going on here? Like the older the women are, the more um hungry they are to really have that part of their life be bountiful and be a source of enjoyment. It's usually, unfortunately, younger women that I see that are shying away from having those conversations. And you think about, first of all, more young women are being diagnosed. The majority of individuals that are treating patients in cancer care that are younger, they're older, they're white, and they're men. And so that is a disconnect right there. It's also a very burdensome experience to talk about something that, as we mentioned before, many consider to be a source of ease. It doesn't matter, it shouldn't matter if I have cancer, if I'm beautiful, every man should want me, everything should fall into place. And, as long as I don't tell anybody what's going on, then I'll be okay. And that typically, of course, is not the reality. And so putting it on paper, that is like your personal sexual health and wellness vision board, so to speak. What are the things that you like? What are the things that you don't like? What are your yeses? What are your nos? What are your maybes? This is such a fertile time to explore with yourself, with your significant other, because how often, especially for some of us who were diagnosed later in life, we have kids, we have jobs. It's like, hey, let's get in, let's get out. We know what we like, let's keep it moving. But when that equation is shifted, oh, the joy, the absolute, uh, and that's the only way I can say it. It's just like the joy and the discovery and the exploration. You're able to learn new and different things about your body. You know, I'm telling all my business, but as a lot of women, heavy chested women, who've had to have double mastectomies have experienced, I no longer have nipples. So, that was one of my pleasure points. But what I also recognized is that there are nerve endings in so many different areas than just the nipples that you can still find some level of enjoyment in that area. Some women are able to get some of that sensation back once the nerves have grown together and there's been a certain amount of healing. But I also, encourage women. We are taught from a very young age, Dr. T, that as women, we aren't supposed to explore our sexuality. We are not supposed to enjoy our own bodies. Our bodies are for the enjoyment of men, they are for birthing children. And once that is over, it is for being a grandmother and holding your grandbabies on your hip. It's like that's all we're good for, so to speak. And I love this, almost like this sexual revolution that I see in so many women now, where it is almost a battle cry that this is not what we are going to accept any longer. We are just as sexual. We are just as wanting. We are just as hungry and worthy of these experiences. And I mean, I've had conversations with groups of women and groups of men. And if you ask me who I think is more sexual, hands down, without a shadow of a doubt, it's the women. So when that's taken from us subconsciously, and when it's taken from us literally, getting that back is such a challenge because as cancer patients, we're already desexualized. We are many times dehumanized, and we are made to believe that you have this cancer, you go over there and deal with that. Once you take the bandana off your head and a little bit of your hair grows back, then you come back and we can tell you whether or not you're worthy of being a part of the gang again. Imagine how many young women navigate this, never knowing that this was going to be a part of their story. And it's heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking, but I really admire the work that you're doing to change that conversation.
Oh, it's
On bigger scales and smaller scales. I think it's going to take all of those efforts. We could talk for a long time, but
good.
I want, as we wrap up,
Mhm.
can I like action steps.
Mhm.
I hope people can leave this podcast and think, or here are a few tips that I can start to implement today in
Mhm.
terms of rediscovering body image and self-love and gratitude and giving yourself grace. So I'm going to ask you, and I didn't prompt you in advance, so
You didn't. Oh,
what are in the work that you do, what are a few things that someone could really start to implement today? I
mhm.
love this concept of looking at yourself in the mirror, and maybe a small mirror if you're not able
Mhm.
to do a full length mirror, and what are you grateful for in your body? And I know sometimes it sounds hokey, but it really can say I'm grateful for, my hands that helped me hold my baby today, whatever it looks
Mhm.
like for you, right? That is going to be different, but what are some things that you would recommend?
Well, I have a version of that. It's slightly different. And the only reason I say that is because of how difficult it was for me personally. So some of the things that I recommend to women are things that helped me. And as I've spoken to other women who've said, that did kind of help, pull me through this point in time. So one of those things is sometimes it's difficult for us to see before we're able to really feel and begin to have a relationship. So I tell women, if you're in the bed one night by yourself, put on, whatever music it is that you love, get massage oil in your hand and massage your body, massage your scars. Become acquainted with the body that some of you think may have betrayed you, but that body saved your life. That body has gotten you through so much. So as she has given to you, we have to learn how to give to her. So, touch your scars, feel your scars, close your eyes so you don't feel as though you're having to face it head on, increments, little by little. So that's one of the exercises that I do recommend for women. The other one that I think is really important kind of goes back to a little bit of what we said, and that is practice using your voice. Even if it is only in the privacy of your own home or your own bathroom for the first couple of months, whatever the situation may be, write down what you feel, write down what you're not feeling, write down what has changed, write down what has shifted, and really get in the habit of using that voice, because the most important conversation that you're going to have with yourself, I mean, most important conversation you're going to have throughout the day is the conversation that you have with yourself. So give yourself grace and give yourself that strength and give yourself the knowledge that your body, your pleasure, your sexual health, and your wellness is worth fighting for and worth advocating for. So for clinicians, there are a couple of things. And the first thing that I tell them is that today is the day that you decide to do things differently. The longer you wait to have these conversations, the harder it's going to be for you to take that step to initiate them. even if it's something as simple as, so is there anything that is changing with your body right now that you're not comfortable with that you'd like to talk to me about? Is, are you and your husband intimate if you're comfortable having this conversation with me? And if not, is there some way that we can help you navigate whatever challenges you may have been facing up until this point? And I use that for clinicians who have patients that they've never had these conversations with before, but I can guarantee you that if you've had patients for months or years, they just haven't said anything to you. So that's kind of a way to ease into the conversation. And if you're not comfortable having that conversation face to face initially, you can always have sexual wellness surveys that you are able to provide to your patients where they're able to fill these out at their leisure, give them the opportunities to take them home, to be in a place that is more comfortable, because that lets them know that you care. That lets them know that their sexual health, their wellness, their relationships, and who they are as a person beyond their diagnosis is critical to you as an oncologist or a clinician that is involved in their care. So have the conversations as soon as possible. Understand that every conversation is not going to be easy, but with the dedication and with the proper focus, it is not just possible, it's not just commendable, it's absolutely critical to making sure that you are fighting for the optimal health and wellness of your patient.
I love that. I'm going to end with one more question for you, and
Absolutely.
that is, so a lot of times, and I hear this from clinicians, is they say, I'll ask, I can ask about it, but what if I don't have an answer?
Mm-hmm.
What if someone says to you, I'm really struggling with body image, or I'm not feeling good in my body now?
Mm-hmm.
What do clinicians do who then say, I'm hearing this, but I don't know what to then how to react, right? Or how to tell my patients. And I think sometimes we can't we might I think just even recognizing and validating that these are normal,
Yes.
common feelings. But what would be your suggestion?
My suggestion would be to not avoid that conversation. Just as that patient was vulnerable with you, you have to be vulnerable with that patient and say, Miss Jones, I hear what you're saying. This is not a conversation that I've been comfortable having, but we can work this out together. Now that we know what the situation is, let me see what is available to me so that I can make sure that I support you in whatever way that you need, whether it's a relationship and sex therapist, whether it is a pelvic floor therapist, whether it's just having the conversation about vaginal estrogen, for example. It's once that you've opened that door, and you said, I hear what you're saying. I'm sorry we haven't had these conversations before now, but this is the perfect opportunity for us to start. So, how can I help you? I think that sometimes clinicians feel like we'll be afraid if they say, I don't know. The doctors that I love the most are the ones that said, I don't know, but I'll find out and I'll get back to you because they're
And I think
human.
that's the key. I don't know, but I'll find out, right? Or I'm going to
Absolutely.
try to find out. Like, I think admitting that we don't know everything, but I agree with you that not having the conversations because we're not sure, we don't know, that's not. I think opening the door, even just a crack, is really, really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that we need to give clinicians grace.
Yeah.
As a patient, a survivor, a thriver, I know if it thinks I'm just going to be, down with all the clinicians, but no, you all see a heavy load of patients every day. Many of you all are not, given any type of formal education on sexual health and wellness. And honestly, that is the mission of Prowl the Lab. And since you and I've known each other for a while, there's this evolution of my patient advocacy and where I want it to be. And where I want my patient advocacy to be right now is in the lane of scholarship, making sure that I had the evidence-based methods, making sure that I have the curriculums to put in place to provide for clinicians, medical schools, educational institutions, advocacy organizations, so that we can meet women, men, and partners where they are along their journey. Because all of us are going through something, and none of us want to feel as though we're doing it alone. So that's the goal of Prowl the Lab, is really making sure that there is a solid sexual health and wellness framework, not just for cancer care, but for chronic illness care and for the care of women and men who have experienced trauma and different abilities as well. That's our goal.
Amazing.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for being here.
Well, thank you.
Where can everyone find you and find Prowl the Lab?
Well, you can find us at all of our handles and everything are Proud the Lab, and I'm so glad that I snatched that up. But we're at proudthelab.com, and we are starting up our monthly blog series again, as well as our monthly Proud the Lab podcast. There, we do have a sexual health and wellness collection that is there that provides different types of guidance, shall we say, to navigate your sexual health and wellness needs between yourself and your partner, or just yourself if that's what you decide. And we are on Instagram. I'm old, so I don't know about the whole TikTok thing, but we are on Instagram at prowthelab.com and excuse me, at Prowl the Lab. And anytime that anyone needs to reach out to me, if you can always reach me at hello@prowthelab.com. Any questions, any support, any resources that you need, please feel free to let me know and I will make sure that you have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here and for doing this incredible work.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored. We've known each other for a while, so this put a smile on my face. I enjoy spending this time with you.
Same.
Thank